Hi, thanks for coming. I'm Steph.
And I'm Rania.
And welcome to Setting the Table, a podcast for all the after dinner conversations.
On today's table, we have Faith Through Our Eyes, Steph's story. Before we get into the episode, we just want to give a quick disclaimer that these are our opinions and experiences, and they are in no way a representation of the faiths that we're discussing.
When I say I was raised in a cult, a lot of people don't expect me to say I was Catholic. Normally, the follow-up question is, were you Mormon? That happened a few times actually this weekend. And I have to explain that, no, I did grow up Catholic, but not like most Catholics.
Mm-hmm. So it was a cult in the practices that you guys took part in, or was it an actual cult, do you think?
It wasn't an actual cult in that we didn't have one leader that we were following, because even though you'd think the Pope would be that leader for the Catholic Church, that wasn't really the case with this church. It was more cult-like practices that were by the people within the church I was in.
Okay, so a lot of rules that you had to follow.
Yes, that were exclusive to our church and other churches around. They're just very rare, and it's not common for a Catholic church.
Okay, so take it from the top for us. How was your childhood in association with the faith?
The church was essentially my entire life. Everything in my life revolved around the church and my faith. My mom started getting really into the faith around the time she was having me, I think. She had been Catholic for a while, but that was when she really started getting into the extremely traditional, conservative Latin Mass Catholic Church.
Oh, wow.
So my entire experience with the faith was basically involved in that church. There was a short period of time that I remember we went to just a regular Catholic church where Mass was in English and you went to church on Sundays, and I remembered that until I think I was still in elementary school, or even just beginning at elementary school when that switch was made and we started going to a very extremely traditional conservative church.
So for somebody who doesn't really know much about the Catholic Church and wasn't raised in it, what do you mean by Latin Mass? What did that entail?
I mean, what it sounds like, the Mass was all in Latin.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of chanting done. From an outside perspective, anybody that hadn't experienced those masses that came from a different church to this church, whether it was for an event or whatever, always had the idea that was they were entering a ritual. It wasn't like you go to church, you listen to the word of God, you receive, you sing, you go home. It felt like something a lot more than that. It was very ritualistic. This is so hard to describe.
I know I've been to one before. I don't think I've been to any Latin ones. Was the baptism one in Latin?
No, the baptism we had was not in Latin.
The baptism was after the Mass, right?
Yeah. The masses are all said in Latin.
Okay.
They're different in just a lot of technicalities around the Mass. The way it's structured, the way it's presented, I guess, and the way it's practiced is very different than a regular church. But also the way the congregation shows up is very different. If you walk into a church like that, you'll see mostly all of the women are dressed head to toe in long skirts, dresses to the floor, wearing veils. Probably 95% of them are pregnant. There's 1,800 kids in that church.
Yeah.
So it's very different. It feels like you're stepping into another world. It's not like you walk into Sunday church at any other Catholic church,
And I also noticed that there were a lot of children, but you couldn't really hear them. Every once in a while, it was a little tiny baby crying or something, but the kids were focused. Yeah. They were locked in.
Yeah. There's a lot of church was taken very seriously. Fear was instilled, at least from my own experience, from such a young age that I was too scared to move. I was too scared to make noise. There was no room to be a kid and exist in church. And obviously that's not to say every family is like that, but...
So you're expected to sit through an entire Mass at what age?
I think there's a little bit of grace for babies and toddlers. That expectation is there right from the beginning. They're going to train you to sit through 2-hour-long church every Sunday from the second
2 hours?
You're basically an hour and a half up to 2 hours.
I don't think the brain is capable of just focusing as an adult, just tuning in.
Yeah, I always struggled with that the entire time I was in the church. I was always how are all of these people paying attention the whole time? And a lot of them have missals and things that they're following along and reading or saying other prayers. But yeah, sitting and just focusing for that amount of time, especially when it was 90 degrees in the summer and that's the last thing you want to be doing and you're dressed head to toe.
So was this every Sunday?
Every Sunday, yes.
And that was the only time you entered church, or did you go multiple times a week?
The time I was in school, I went basically every day.
7 days a week?
I would say 6 days a week because I didn't normally go on Saturdays because I was with my dad.
Oh, okay.
But Monday through Friday, we would go to church, and oftentimes there was some prayer time added onto that. So before or after. And the church that we went to during the week, it was before school, and it was considered a low mass. So it wasn't as long, and it wasn't as, I don't know, big of a deal, I guess. Yeah, it wasn't as elaborate, but it was still every single day we went to church, and oftentimes there was prayer after, there was confession time, there were other adorations and holy hours throughout the week that we went to. It was like our entire lives revolved around going and being at church.
And what was the role of women from like what you remember and like what you actually know now? What was the role of women in that church?
The role of women, I mean, women honestly bear the majority of the responsibility, not authority, but responsibility to birth the kids, raise the kids, take care of the kids, and then train the kids to raise the next kids. And so as I've gone back to that church as an adult, being removed from it, I've only been a couple of times. And it is heartbreaking to see, because you walk into that church and it is normal to see a woman who's 9 months pregnant with a 1-year-old on her hip, trying to take care of the 1-year-old and the 3-year-old and the 5-year-old in the back of the church, while the husband and the oldest kid sits in the church enjoying mass peacefully. Like, the women's hands are so full all the time, and that's normal.
Even like the little girls, like,
oh yeah, as soon as you hit the age of 9, you're taking care of younger kids, because about almost every family in that church has, this is being generous in saying, only 6 kids. Most of them have
more than that,
8, 10, 12 plus. That's the norm.
How many families can you fit in this church? There's like 3 families altogether.
Yeah, you'd be surprised. There's a lot of them. There's probably, like, if there's 200 people, probably over 100 are kids.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I mean, you want your children to be going to church. If like that's what you believe and you believe that that's the right way, you want your children to be going to church. But I feel like even Jesus knows that like kids should be given grace. Like they should just come as they are and be playing at church or running around, and that's like fine.
Yeah,
that should be fine.
That is definitely not fine at that church. And there was like there's no room to be kids. There's no room to be human. There's only room to be the perfect, most reverent, most holy Catholic.
So you're missing out on a lot of the like best parts of religion, I would say.
Yeah, definitely.
You're just there to follow rules.
Yeah, there was an extreme amount of rules. But I would say growing up, I didn't think I was missing out on anything. Growing up in it, the indoctrination started from such a young age that I thought I had it the best. Like, we had the best community. We had the best circles. We were better than everybody. And obviously then I went to a school run by that church, or run by the people in that church. That's what I was hearing at church. That's what I was hearing at school. That's what I was hearing at home. It was like we were holier than everyone. We were holier than other Catholics. We were holier than everybody that wasn't Catholic. God forbid a non-Christian try and walk into that church. They would have absolutely been looked down upon or not welcomed at all. But I wasn't aware that I was lacking or that I was missing out on anything growing up in it.
And you were given the responsibility, like you said, with how you dressed in terms of how it affected men in the church. Like, you were given that responsibility, but you felt at the time okay with it because you felt kind of like you were being noble, or what was that?
Modesty, like that whole issue of modesty and dressing appropriately was something that I pushed back on from a very, very young age.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I would say I pushed back on a lot. Like, I was considered like the rebellious kid. I was considered like the one that gave my parents my mom a hard time. And modesty and dressing a specific way was something that I always fought back on. I remember having full arguments with my mom by 11 years old about how it didn't make sense that I was responsible for the way the 55-year-old man looked at me, because that was what was taught, was that if you didn't dress appropriately, if you weren't dressed modestly, and a man looked at you in a sexual way, even if you were a child, then it's your fault that he's sinning and you're causing him to stumble. So you're at fault if you're not, for as long as you're not dressing in a specific way.
Did they allude to that, or did they ever flat out say that?
Oh, they definitely flat out said that. I would say that is something that I heard from my mom often, and like people I was surrounded with. I wouldn't say that was necessarily taught in school or in church, but that was conversation that was happening all the time and what was encouraged and what was expected. I remember my mom flat out saying that often, and it never sat right with me that I had to wear a long skirt in order to not be looked at, because I was aware from a very young age of the way people looked at me when I was out in public. So like that didn't just exist within our church. We were expected to behave, dress, act that way outside of church as well. So I was very aware at 11 years old that when I was in the grocery store, everybody was staring at me, because it's not normal to see a kid in the summertime dressed in a dress to the floor or a skirt to the floor, or the rule was like below your knees. And there was no room to like dress, act, behave like a kid. Or especially I remember like going to the park. Like I knew I wanted to go play basketball. I wanted to go play soccer. I wanted to go play on the playground, and I had to wear a skirt or a dress. And I always loved gymnastics from the time I was so little. And I was like, well, I can't do a handspring because I'm wearing a skirt to the floor.
So the attire didn't serve your lifestyle. It was just a hindrance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was very aware that it looked very odd, and I had a lot more people's attention on me when I was dressing that way than when I wasn't. People didn't think twice if I was wearing a regular pair of shorts or a pair of pants and a shirt. Like nobody thought twice about that. But when I'm dressed head to toe, covered, people would look at me. And I was like, well, isn't this kind of defeating the whole purpose? I'm getting everybody's attention by dressing this way when I'm supposed to be deflecting it.
So you're having to dress this way, and then you're also being told other things about your body and its purpose, and preparing you for what? Marriage?
Marriage and motherhood. Preparing you to be a good wife and a mom.
And did they prepare the boys to be good husbands and fathers?
No. It was kind of like, or the way it felt was that women needed to be told how to be good mothers and wives, and men would naturally fall into that because, like I said, the responsibility is on the women. So for a man to be a husband and a father, that's easy.
You've made the world perfect for him.
Yeah.
He's not going to stumble because he's not going to...
The woman is going to take care of everything and ensure the circumstances are always perfect and right and ideal for him, that being the husband and father that he's expected to be is normal. And I would not say the expectations for husbands and fathers are high. There was no talk, no teaching about how to be emotionally present, how to be available, how to be a loving partner. That was not a conversation that was had. It was, you provide, and even then the standards are low. You can put 12 kids in a 3-bedroom house, no problem.
Oh my God.
So there was no preparation or expectation set for them. But the expectation for women was
to create a perfect world for them.
To create a perfect world, be able to, first of all, carry 12 pregnancies and birth kids and bounce right back so that you can do it again next year.
Wait. Can we just focus on that a little bit more? So your job as a woman is to birth as many children as possible. So then the women are in agreement, whether they're subconsciously or consciously aware of it. They're in agreement with having as many babies as possible. What does that mean for intimacy and sex? Like, what are you taught then? You're taught to always be available to your husband. So there's no concept of, because a lot of Catholics are very big on natural family planning.
That is not a thing.
Okay.
That is not a thing in this church. That is seen as wrong.
It's seen as wrong. So it's not even just, it's not a thing. It's flat out just.
Yeah. I would say that is a subject that a few people, like some people within that church, disagree on. There are some people who use natural family planning, but not natural family planning in the way, like it's used in a very strange way. I remember when I was going through marriage prep, right? We have to do that with our church. We were doing it with a priest, and we're going through all the things. He kind of had like an outline of what he was supposed to talk to us about. And he was like, natural family planning. We don't need to talk about that, and completely breezed over it. So then I was like, at that point, I didn't have any awareness around really what that was or how to practice it. There was no like teaching about my body at all within my family. So I didn't understand it. I had no idea what it meant. I had no idea how to do it. So I was kind of on my own to figure that out. But I remember at the time there was another couple that I was friends with that was getting married around the same time. So they were going through marriage prep at the same time. And we had originally started marriage prep with a different priest who was not a Latin Mass Catholic priest. And he did bring up natural family planning to them. And I remember my friend at the time being like, oh, I can't believe he thought we would use that. And
There's the mentality right there.
yeah. And I remember going home and talking to my fiance at the time and being like, well, doesn't it make sense to use natural family planning? Like, doesn't it make sense to know our bodies and know what's okay for our bodies and like honor our bodies like we should, in that we don't just get pregnant and birth babies back to back for 20 years straight? Because that's common. There's women in that church who have been going through postpartum for 20 years.
That is not
There's
okay.
women who are having kids at the same time that their oldest kids are having kids. That's also normal. So like it is I was very aware at that time that that didn't seem right and that didn't feel right and that felt so disrespectful and like careless to women, but that was the normal there.
I can't imagine how depleted they must feel.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
not only pregnant, but they're also nursing.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, how do you recoup and how do you have the energy? This is where it gets really difficult for me, because it's like, I know that the amount of children people have, couples have, choose to have, is up to them, and a lot of people can handle different variations. Like, I know
Mm-hmm.
2 is good for me at this stage of life that I'm in right now. Like, that's enough for me, and I know that there are women out there and families that can handle that.
Mm-hmm.
But I genuinely don't understand from a scientific perspective, and even just like a spiritual one, like just not being able to like give your children attention and time. And I mean, how could you possibly give 10, 11, 12 children attention? And
Well, you can't.
it's not possible.
It's not possible. If you asked them, they would say that they're doing it. They would say that they love to be a mom. Realistically, their kids will grow up and resent them. And I know, because I'm one of those kids that grew up
Yeah.
and resented my mom.
You have the credentials to say that.
Yeah, I am one of the kids that grew up and resented my mom because her choice to continue to have so many kids that she couldn't handle turned me into a human that felt like so out of place, so unlovable, so lonely, because she never had the attention to give me that's required to raise a healthy human. She didn't have the capacity to give that to me because she had 8 other kids that she was caring for before me, and then was pregnant very soon after having me. And I know that that's the experience of a lot of people that were raised in that.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there are some people who have that experience and recognize it and then still go on to do the same thing. But I remember having conversations as I was graduating high school and out of high school, and I was becoming more aware of these things and talking about these conversations and like a little bit more independent and able to do that. I remember having those conversations with the people I went to school with and people who were raised in similar situations, and a lot of them felt the same way. Like, so many of them struggled with mental health issues and depression and suicidal thoughts because there was just this overwhelming feeling of like loneliness and just no will to live without connection. Like, there's this inability to like connect to humans because you didn't have that from the time you were a baby.
We know now too that it's more than, kids require more than just a roof and
Mm-hmm.
food and water, and
Yeah.
like the basics is also connection
Mm-hmm.
and time, and
Yeah.
like
So there's a lot of kids that are not even getting the bare minimum.
that makes me so sad.
Yeah, it is so sad. It makes me so like, it honestly makes me so angry. And I know, or I assume that as a mom, and I assume this because I had this switch happen as a mom, or I feel this as a mom, that like, you know what your kids need from you, whether or not you can necessarily give it all the time. You know that your kid needs more attention. You know that your kid needs more love. You know that your kid needs more patience. So those women who are kind of following suit and just living this way, they have to know. You have to, as a woman, be aware that your kids aren't getting what they need. And it's such a selfish decision to continue having kids, knowing that you're not taking care of them. Like,
And your kids are going to show signs of that too. Like, there's going to be behavior problems or other things that are going on
Mm-hmm.
that is going to tell you that something is wrong.
Yeah.
So a lot of women seem to know or seem to feel the same way about their childhood, and then they continue on to have a bunch of kids. Do you think it's because in their head there's like a greater purpose? Like they're continuing and trekking through because there's a greater purpose to it?
Yeah, there's a huge focus on pain and suffering, and that being good, in that it makes you holier and more prepared for heaven. You know, you're kind of making up for your inherent wrong. by going through pain and suffering. So yeah, women do become holier, do become more fit for heaven if the more kids they have, because it's a lot more pain and suffering.
I know that I personally felt closer to God through my motherhood journey. But I can't imagine even having the space for having the time to sit down with God and like having that time to sit down with my kids. Because whenever I'm like parenting, or even just like little moments where like you're nursing your kid or you're speaking to your kid, like you feel closer to God in those moments.
Mm-hmm.
But how is it possible to give, because you know that there's like a season,
Mm-hmm.
we know because we went from 1 to 2
Yeah.
pretty recently, but like there's a season where you're not giving your oldest the most amount of attention. Like you
Mm-hmm.
need to be giving that time to the baby, and also you're in the thick of like depleted postpartum hormonal time, and then you're going to come out of it and you're going to be able to give them more time. Like
Yeah.
we've both been able to, like, I'm
Yep.
slowly coming out of it, you came out of it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going back to back into pregnancy, how is there any time? Like you're never getting out of that phase.
You're never getting out of that phase. It's just kids get used to not having your attention and not being cared for. And then the oldest are taught to take care of the younger ones. So it like lightens the burden a bit.
It's the purpose of life.
To get to
It
heaven.
can't-
That's the only purpose for them.
I mean, that's good in like doing good things. Like it has to be more than just having kids. It's preparing your kids. And in order to prepare your kids, you need to have time to spend with your kids in order to prepare them.
Well, that's kind of, I would say, like, I started questioning things as a late teenager at that point, though I was already married and pregnant. And, I was, like, aware that this felt really off. Like, I am going to be, we compare God's relationship to us as mothers to children. And it felt so wrong, or it felt so strange. Like, we're always taught that God cares so much and loves each one of us so deeply and has thought so much of us and really pays so much attention to us. But then we're not doing that for our own kids.
No.
We're not giving them attention, love, care, connection. We're not modeling that to them at all. We're just moving on to the next kid. It's a really weird phenomenon that happens, I think, in that church, probably elsewhere too. But it feels like women believe, they're indoctrinated and believe that their worth comes from bearing kids. So not necessarily that their worth comes from having or being a mother. It comes from having kids. So you'll see, like, women, like, it's almost like an addiction to having babies, which sounds so weird. But like they chase that high that you get when you have a new baby. And then the second they're a toddler, it's like, okay, on to the next. And it's such a weird mindset.
There's no effort into like making them into people. Like these people are eventually going to grow up and be a part of society, and there's no prep for that. It doesn't seem like.
That's a conversation that I've had with people who are in the church, especially like people in my family who are still in it or still like kind of follow those beliefs. And I, like, from the second I had my first, I was like, oh, this is not something I'm going to do 10 times. This is something, after I had my first, I thought I was never going to have another kid. And then as things got easier, like I always said that in the trenches. And then as things got easier, I was like, okay, maybe one more. But I was very aware that I was not going to have a lot of kids. And I was always met with like, oh, you'll get over it. Like you'll get past it. Like you'll love the newborn phase so much that like you'll want it again. And I was always like, well, yeah, I do love the newborn phase. Like those snuggles are so nice. It's like you do get a high from having a newborn and birthing a soul and whatever. Like that's incredible. But also, I'm not going to do that if it means I can't take care of the humans I've already birthed. Like there is a certain amount of responsibility on me as a mother, and I can't neglect that in order to just keep bringing kids into this world.
No, and keep going through the newborn phase. I mean, then you're missing like every single age has this like beautiful, joyful tone to it. Like each one brings a different perspective to you, and to miss out on that.
Yeah, and each age I feel like brings so many lessons and so much growth for you as a human if you're available for it.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you're just getting pregnant and having the next kid, there really isn't any availability for growth or learning or any of that.
It's a missed opportunity. It really is. And then those kids are also, I mean, you were one of those kids, so I guess you can tell us. But what is their exposure to the outside world?
There is very, very limited exposure to the outside world. So like my entire world was my church and my school, and that was it. We didn't go to public school. None of the kids at that church go to a public school. And it's not necessarily looked down on, but it is by some people, some influential people. it's looked down on to go to other regular Catholic churches, private schools. Like, we had our school that was connected to our church that was run by the people in the church, and a decent amount of kids went there. It was still very small. And then the rest of them were homeschooled. So we were not around people who were not in our circle.
And didn't share your beliefs.
It was like we existed in an echo chamber, and that was very intentional.
Okay.
Which, I mean, it got the point across. Like, it did what they hoped, in that we grew up brainwashed, completely indoctrinated, believing that we were better than everybody around us. Like, if we interacted with a kid from a public school who could be an incredible kid, we thought we were way smarter, we were way holier, we were just overall better humans.
Well, you're getting information that's already been, like, for lack of better words, like chewed up and spit out for you.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like, okay, we're going to learn about Protestants or Jews or Muslims.
We were going to
hear their perspective about it.
Yeah, we were going to learn how everybody else was wrong. We were not at all taught to think for ourselves. We were not allowed to question. We were not allowed to think for ourselves. And I think that's why I was considered like the black sheep and like the one that stood out, or the rebel, or the one that, the troubled kid. Because I did question a lot of it from a very young age. Like I said, I was questioning the way I had to dress as a 12-year-old. And I wouldn't say I ever really believed the teachings that I was taught. Like, I never truly felt aligned with it and never really like connected with it. So I was questioning it, and I was considered like out there.
Pretty incredible that you were able to do that, considering the fact that you didn't have TV.
Yeah.
You didn't have your
Internet
friends
access.
were already vetted.
Yeah. Yeah. My mom was very specific about who we were allowed to be around. Like, it was very, very limited interaction with people who were outside of our circle. And even people within our circle, like if I was to have a sleepover with my friends, my mom was talking to their mom beforehand about what I would be exposed to, the conversations that weren't allowed to happen, the things we weren't allowed to do. Like, I couldn't.
Which I feel like I would do for my kids too. Like, if they were going to be at somebody else's house, I'd want to know X, Y, Z about how they run their home. But
yeah. But it was like, you better not have the TV on if she's present. Or you better not, let them go out. Or, like, everything was so sheltered.
Yeah.
That, like, any influence was completely prohibited.
You all look the same. You think the same. You're dressing the same. You have the same responsibilities as these other women that are part of the church. Mm-hmm. And you're just isolated within that community.
Yeah. I remember, like, I had one friend who was not really Catholic at all, that I was pretty close to and that I spent a lot of time around. And I remember feeling so, like, out of place being around anyone that didn't think like me, because, like, God forbid a conversation come up about what I wanted to do with my life, it, like, would stop and make me think, because I was going to be a mom. Like, I was going to get married and I was going to have kids. So, like, I was so confused by that question. Or, like, I remember as we were getting older, and, like, you go through that phase of, like, when you're a teenager and you're thinking about becoming a mom and all that stuff, and you're picking out baby names and things like that. And it was always like, well, how many kids do you want to have? And I was like, what do you mean? That's not up to me. Like, that's not a choice I get to make. I was so, like, confused by that. So there was, like, this just natural isolation, because I didn't feel like I could participate in the same conversations or relate to the people that didn't think like me.
And it wasn't even necessarily your beliefs. It was just, again, chewed up, regurgitated beliefs of these older adults in your life.
As soon as I was out of that circle and not under that influence, and I started thinking about it for myself, then I realized, like, yeah, this isn't what I believe at all. This has never felt aligned. This doesn't really make any sense to me. And I'm just doing this because this is what I was told I had to do. Even when it came to getting married and having kids, like I did, like, it was all because that's what I had to do. It wasn't like this intense desire to have kids by 20 years old, but it was like, that's normal. And that is me being a good wife. I can't say no to my partner. I can't say I don't want to have sex.
Did you also feel like your life would begin when you got married and you had children? Like
Yeah,
it was almost like you're
absolutely.
waiting for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that's where my purpose and my fulfillment was. That's like where my value came from, was getting married and having kids.
So, I mean, God forbid somebody in your church has fertility issues.
Oh,
'Cause
yeah.
It's not like, I know of some people that have gone through that within your church, and
Mhm.
that it's just like a taboo thing. Like it's like hush hush, don't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
But also, why don't you have more kids? And it's like nobody's asking why or what their struggles are. It just seems to be like a judgmental tone and
It
whispers.
is, and like I was saying, like it's this like hyperfixation on just having kids. Like there's no respect for the female bodies or what the female body is going through. It's just about having kids. Like there are women in that church who are miscarrying and getting pregnant within the same month. And there's no conversation about like, hey, are you okay? Is your body okay? Because you were still bleeding when you got pregnant. It's like, well, she's pregnant now, so that's all that matters.
Thank God for that.
Yeah, that's all that we care about, is that now she's going to have a baby, and if she miscarries again, she'll just get pregnant again. So it's like this hyperfixation on just having kids, because that's all that you find your worth and your value in.
I can't like shake the belief, and it's been validated, that this type of culture and the way that women are raised specifically, and the way that men are raised, and or lack thereof, just breeds a culture of child abuse, like severe child abuse.
Yeah, we've mentioned this before, but like we were raised to be the perfect victims of abuse because we were so used to it.
Yeah.
We were so used to being abused and not being cared for that it breeds you to be the perfect. Honestly, it works. What they're doing works. Their system to
Nobody's doubting.
Their system to turn little girls into women that just serve their husbands and submit and bear them a million children and take care of absolutely everything about their life. It works. They've done it. They're doing it well.
It seems like the only box that they have for men is work.
Mm-hmm.
Get a job and work.
I remember when I was married, and like that never sat right with me. I was always like, why is it just that a man has to show up in this way? Like he just has to provide the bare minimum, and then he's a good father and a good dad. That never sat right with me, and that was a conversation that I often had with my ex. And, you know, there are groups, there are events, there are things that go on within this church. So there was this men's group where they would get together and they would have conversations and speak for hours on whatever topic they chose. And he would go to those groups, and it always made me so angry when he would come back and he would have spent hours there and would be telling me about the night and how they talked about absolutely nothing relevant to the lives they were living. There were no conversations about how to show up as a father, how to show up as a husband, how to be a better Catholic. It was all these conversations debating history or debating some world event that has actual no effect on our lives. And there was no focus on bettering themselves as men.
It's so sad because there's such an opportunity there. I mean, how often are you going to be able to sit in a room with all these men? And
and the women weren't able to, because the man could not be left alone with one kid, never mind the 12 that he had.
Oh, good point.
So there were no women's groups. There was no girls' night out.
Well, the women's groups are also children's group. It's just like bring your kids, and they're going to run around while we try to have 1,000,001 conversations that we start and don't finish.
Exactly. But yeah, the opportunity, because the men were so far removed from parenting in a healthy way that women couldn't leave their kids with them. Like, it's at the point where if a mom is going to the hospital to have her ninth baby, the 12-year-old girl is in charge of the household instead of the father, because she is more trustworthy than him to be able to actually feed the kids and bathe them and put them to bed and take care of them. Like, that's normal. It's like, well, my husband doesn't know how to cook, so my daughter will do it.
It's just a no-brainer. It's not even like they're saying that as a way of like putting down their husbands. It's just just the norm.
Oh, that's just normal. Nobody thinks twice about that. It's like, yeah, of course you can leave your husband home with your kids. And it's so interesting because like I said, all of this works because women are so busy, their hands are so full, they don't have any time to gather, connect, or communicate with the other women.
Well, that would be a direct threat to, let's
Exactly.
just say what it is. It would be a direct threat to the leadership of that church and to the indoctrination that they do.
Exactly. It
God
would
forbid.
completely dismantle that should women actually get together and gather and have real, honest conversations.
Well, they can't get away with a witch trial now, so
Yeah, exactly.
it's a little harder. Poor
so
them.
if you keep all the women busy, their hands full,
Mm-hmm.
and their time completely full of responsibilities of running the entire household.
And we keep them disconnected from their bodies.
Oh, absolutely. You completely discourage any amount of connection to your bodies.
You have a perfect vessel for sexual trauma, for
Mhm.
emotional abuse, for all those things. I mean, the men just, this sounds like a great church for them.
Oh,
Not for growth or for anything, but for serving their own selfish.
For lustful, selfish,
Mhm.
not virtuous men.
Yeah. Well,
You know?
men that don't bear the fruits of the Holy Spirit. 'Cause
Yeah.
That's what they talk about too, like being self-disciplined, what is self-discipline if all of your temptation is ripped away and it's the women's responsibility to show up not in a way that would tempt you. I mean, these men definitely don't get on pornography sites to find that elsewhere.
No.
I mean, they've
It's not like
cracked
that's
the
a
code.
raging addiction.
No, they've clearly cracked the code. I mean, these men clearly don't struggle with that. I couldn't name 5 men, and I'm not even part of this church. I can't even name 5 of them.
I don't think I could name 5 men that don't. I think I could point out every one of them that does.
Oh, man.
That always enraged me, and just has enraged me more as I've gotten older. But hearing women say, well, we can't go there because women are going to be dressed like they might wear a low-cut top. Shut up. Your man should be able to be around women who are existing as women without thinking about every single one of them.
If your man is like that, you don't have a man, you have a dog on a leash. And honest to God, my dog behaves better than that. Like, I can put out a piece of steak and be like, don't touch it.
Enough said. That's it. It's a whole bunch of men on leashes and women who are trying to constantly control every circumstance in order to keep their attention, their eyes on them, and them, well behaved.
It seems so contradictory to Christianity as a whole. Like, when you're like reading the word and you like actually build a relationship, it seems so contradictory. I mean, like, you can't build your faith if your faith doesn't get shaken.
I remember, this is a vivid conversation. Like, I remember having with my mom when I was 12 years old, because we would go back and forth.
Man, little Steph was on top of it.
I was like, I was really thinking about all of these things, and I was like, this doesn't make any sense. But I remember having this conversation, arguing with my mom, and being like, how are these men supposed to get holier if we only control the circumstances and their environments to ensure they follow the rules? They're not following the rules. They're just in the perfect circumstance. I remember being 12 and being like, how is it wrong for me to wear makeup or wear pants or not wear a veil? Like, how is that on me and not on the 50-year-old man with a wife and 10 kids who can't help but look at me in a sexual way? Like, that was a conversation that was like happening constantly. It happened all through my teenage years, and still happens. I still have this conversation with my mom, although I mostly shut it down and just tell her that I will never agree with her.
Yeah.
And she will never convince me otherwise. But it's still a conversation that happens.
And your mom is like the better of those people because she's actually having those conversations with you. Like, these conversations aren't great, but she actually is doing it. Whereas a lot of people are just going to be talking about you.
Yeah.
And praying for you, quote unquote.
Yeah. God, please make Steph more like us.
Yes, please. We just feel so bad for her.
Yeah.
But we're not going to challenge her.
Yeah. In school, we were, well, first of all, as Catholics, as Christians, you'd think that we would know the Bible like the back of our hand. You'd think we would have really studied and read the Word of God all the time. That was not the case at all. We grew up not reading the Bible, not knowing the Word of God. We knew the rules of our church, and that was it. And our religion classes, as we got older, were just all about how to fight for our beliefs. So it was all about apologetics and how to prove to people that we were right and they were wrong. And I remember being a teenager, and we were around some groups that were Christian and had a lot of similar views, but they weren't Catholic. And this was when I was already questioning things, and I was always like, well, okay, I know how to tell them that I'm right and they're wrong. But they seem like they actually have a connection to God, and they don't need to tell me, they don't need to prove that to me. Like, it's so obvious in the way they live and exist that they actually have a relationship with God. They understand the Word of God. They live by it. And all I know is to tell them that I'm right and they're wrong and I'm going to heaven and they're not, and this is why.
It's crazy.
And yeah, I remember, like, there was no real connection to God and our faith and our religion. It was just like, these are the rules you follow, and this is why we're better than everybody around us and why everybody else is wrong. And still, if you, like, when I talk about it with people, I often hear people be like, well, why aren't you talking to these people? Why don't you get them out of it? Like, I have family members who are still in it. I have people who used to be friends who are still in it. And it's almost impossible to get through to them. You can't talk to them about it, because the second you're talking to them about it, they're so convinced that you are so dumb and they're so much smarter than you that, like, they won't even consider anything you're saying.
Yeah, it's so deeply rooted. I don't think people give enough credit to that.
No. And I actually had a conversation that was very, like, healing and very eye-opening within the last few months with a girl who grew up Protestant, but in the same sort of homeschool circles. I knew her. I wasn't close with her, but I knew her family. And she still is. She's Christian, but not Catholic. And we were talking about our experience growing up and kind of what we thought of each other, which I felt able to do now that I wouldn't consider myself Catholic. And I remember saying to her, like, I was so jealous that you had a relationship with God. Like, you seemed to be on fire for your faith. You loved your relationship with God. You were close to Him. You had something that I didn't have. And she was like, I was very aware that you guys were not interested in hearing our perspective and not interested in hearing what we had to say. It was only about telling us how we were wrong and you were right. And, like, she nailed it. That's exactly what happened. And that's what would still happen should she have a conversation with somebody in that church. But it was, like, so interesting to hear that from somebody who is Christian and who does have a good relationship with God and who, like, I admire a lot. Like, she was very aware that we were so on guard. That's all we could do was argue.
It must be validating too.
Yeah, it really was.
So
Yeah.
when do you think that, obviously you've touched on, like, you as a kid being like, whoa, this is wrong. When was the moment that you were like, I need to get out of this?
The first moment that it was like a light bulb went off in my head and I was, like, aware, was when I was pregnant with Evie. I would say, like, I had these feelings of, like, this isn't aligned, this doesn't feel right, maybe I need to try a different Catholic church, but still was, like, connected to the Catholic church and still felt like the natural, like need to defend it.
Yeah.
But when I was pregnant with Evie, I kind of had this light bulb moment when I was listening to a podcast. I think it was the Freely Rooted podcast. And the hosts were talking about our nervous system. And this was the first conversation I had ever heard about our nervous system and, like, what that was. And they were talking about our nervous system and the connection between the emotional, spiritual, and physical. I remember pausing the podcast and, like, I was arranging Evie's nursery. I was painting and I was doing that. And I remember just standing in this room. It was like 10 o'clock at night. And I'm standing there like, oh yeah, this is all connected. Like, I've been taught that this is all disconnected And this is actually all connected. And it doesn't make sense to treat the body I believe and soul that I believe God so perfectly created in this way. Like, it doesn't make sense to separate it all and disregard this part of my humanness that he designed and created in his image. That doesn't make any sense.
God was intentional, and you're being taught to not be intentional with your body.
Yeah. And so I remember that light bulb moment, and then I started thinking about it, and then I started like really questioning everything I was believing, which was so uncomfortable. So uncomfortable, because there's some safety in feeling like you got it. You're doing everything right. You're married. You're having kids. You're going to go to heaven as long as you follow this set of rules for the rest of your life. So it was very, very uncomfortable, and I felt like a ton of shame around questioning. But I couldn't shake the feeling of, this isn't what God intended for us. God didn't intend for us to disregard our bodies, and like, obviously that including our emotional and mental health as well. That doesn't make any sense. Like, and those things couldn't exist. You can't exist in a church that tells you all of your worth comes from having as many kids as you can, and teaches you to completely abandon your body constantly and abandon your intuition and honor your body. Those things can't coexist. So it was really, when I was pregnant and I was thinking about that, and then I was obviously thinking a lot about parenting, and she was my first. This was all going to be brand new to me. And thinking about the correlation between how I parented her and how God showed up as like our father.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking about that, I was recognizing that like what the vision I had of God modeled in that church is not at all how a parent would show up and connect with their child.
Not a healthy one.
Not a healthy one. And I remember saying, like, an all perfect, all loving God wouldn't show up in this same way.
Wouldn't care that you're wearing pants.
He really wouldn't care that you're wearing pants. I promise.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bigger issues he's worried about.
I feel like he's more about like this world is supposed to be about preparing your heart and your spirit, and there's very little done there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was all about like the physical, what you're physically doing. But modesty is about your heart, your intentions, your like where your mind is at, and what your intentions are. But we were taught it was something so different. But I remember just being very aware that like, this isn't right. Like, this is not, I wouldn't parent my kid that way. Why would we think that he is relating to us in this way, or like expecting this of us? That doesn't really make any sense.
I know we've had these conversations so much over the last couple of years, but the more you talk about it, the more I'm like genuinely surprised that you made it out, and that you were having these thoughts while so deep in connection. I mean, everybody around you for years, for your entire life, has these same beliefs. Like, it is insane, incredible. I'm so proud of you. That's what I want to say, because this is unreal.
I think that it kind of, like, I was having those thoughts. I was starting to question things, and then I kind of just hit a point where everything unraveled in my life, where it was just a season of undoing everything. I was going through divorce. I was like dealing with the fact that I had a ton of sexual trauma to deal with. I was unlearning all of the religious beliefs. I was disconnecting from the people I had called my friends and family. Like, I was just undoing everything.
It was an avalanche.
Yeah, it really was. Kind of like trying to bring myself back to some neutral zone, like some square one to restart, and then figure out what I learned or what I believe and what I know to be true, and how I actually want to live my life, like as myself, as my human, as the mother I am.
In a perfect world, you would be doing one thing at a time.
Yeah.
But you really were. In order for you to leave that marriage or to see it as the abusive situation that it was, you had to go back to where it came from and you couldn't separate the two.
I could not. I really couldn't separate it because the way I was raised trained me to be the perfect victim for that. And then on top of that, the way I was let down by the authority within the church when I was being sexually abused, like I couldn't sit there and say, like, yes, I was being sexually abused by one bad person in the church. No, I talked to 20 different priests about it.
You can't say the story without also mentioning the fact that you were constantly seeking out other opinions. You were constantly trying to like rationalize what was happening to you.
Always. I was trying so hard to like understand how it could be my fault and how I was in the wrong here.
Do you understand how huge that is? That like, if I was being told repeatedly that what I was feeling was wrong and that it wasn't aligning with faith, and like every single person in my life basically was telling me this, I would just sit down and put a blanket over myself and get cozy in that horrible life. Like I would.
Yeah.
What else is there to do?
Yeah. I mean, I think I was like for a while after I had Evie, I was like, okay, this is my life, I guess. This is what it is. My intuition is so strong, and I knew it was so wrong, and it was so messed up. And I do care a lot about justice and things being right and fair. And so I think honestly that like drive to have things right and good kind of pushed me, because I was like, I couldn't keep existing and pretending that everything was good and I was okay with everything and that I wasn't being like harmed in so many ways, and be a part of that church. And I think like when I was newly married, when I had my first, I was still going to that church.
Yeah.
I was still there. But even then I was starting to speak out a little bit. Like I was starting to say some questionable things according to the people within the church.
Or just making people think, I mean, in order to move forward, I feel like with like the rest of the conversation, I feel like we need to talk about the elephant in the room. And that's like, my first question would be how your church specifically handled all the scandals that go on with the Catholic Church. I mean, there is a stigma, and it's that way because there's been so many repeat offenses with abuse, specifically sexual abuse of children in the church. Did you hear about that at all?
It was not talked about with us at all. But I remember as I was getting older, I would say around the time I was 16, 17, and then when I was dating and getting married, I started looking into that on my own. I think honestly a lot of it had to do with the fact that I was being abused at that time. Like I was being sexually abused, and then I was being told by the priests that I was going to when I was confessing like I'm being raped. They were like, well, God will forgive you. You'll be okay. So I think like I was like, wait a minute, wait a second. All these leaders are telling me I'll be okay. I'll be forgiven.
And you didn't even necessarily know that it was rape at the time, but you were describing the definition of rape.
Yeah. I was like, he's having sex with me when I don't want to. And it was a lot of priests that I talked to before one of them was like, hey, you know that's rape, right? And I was like, what? But I think at that time I knew what was happening to me was wrong, even though I wasn't necessarily getting like outside validation. I knew it was wrong, and it was making me question a lot of authority in the church, because I was not getting the validation from the authority in the church. I was like getting confirmation that what was happening to me was okay. So then I started questioning the authority, and I started looking into it on my own, and I started researching and just seeing the numbers and the millions and millions that the Catholic Church has paid out in lawsuits to cover up the sexual abuse allegations.
And you did tell me too that like if something did come to your attention, like if there was like a headline that was out or something, that it was because it was the one true Church of Jesus Christ. So of course
it is going to be attacked.
Yeah,
of course
the
devil
enemy.
is going to be the devil is going to be attacking the church and trying to make the church look bad. In reality, the people running the church are actually just really bad.
Why are people so obsessed with protecting the churches? Like, why are we so obsessed with protecting these like group of people, human beings that are like subject to human error and evil intentions and all of these things, and also just like a physical building? Like, why are we so attached to that? It's our job as members of a religious organization to hold these people accountable. We're not supposed to be sitting down and, does anybody read the Bible? Like,
no.
Come
They read
on.
the Catechism of the Catholic Church.
Get out of here. Like,
no, they don't. It's, well, in order to hold people accountable, it would mean you have to question. And if you question, you get uncomfortable. So it's easier to be uncomfortable and silent than question and speak out. And that we had a prime example of that within our church.
Yeah.
Which this was all happening at the same time. This was with the priest that married me and did my marriage prep.
Baptized your baby.
Baptized my baby. He came into our church and he was just the most wonderful man. He was a young, energetic, extremely smart, smarter than everyone. Charismatic priest. And I flagged him immediately. I knew something was off. And I would say that there were a lot of families that got very close to him. There were a lot of my friends that got very close to him. He was the priest that would come over to your house for dinner, and come to your kid's birthday party and come to whatever the volleyball parties and all of those things. And he was the best to everyone. And I was so on guard. There was something off. I knew there was something off. And I started saying things. And I noticed in particular that he was really close to a 13-year-old girl in a way that made me really uncomfortable. And it started with me just mentioning it to my family and bringing up the conversations that were immediately shut down, and then bringing it up to a few other people and just kind of putting it out there. Like, just not even saying, hey, I think he's sexually abusing her, but saying like, hey, what do you think of this? Don't you think there's something going on here? Like, don't you think this isn't normal? This isn't right. There's something we're not seeing. And I was shut down time and time again.
What year was this? Because I feel like I was present for some of these.
Yeah, you were. Well, you were kind of present towards the end of it. So this was after I had Evie that it actually came out.
Oh, wow.
But I thought something was off from the beginning. I did not like the fact that our priest was texting a young girl good morning and good night every night. That was strange. That was really weird to me.
How did people not think that that was strange?
Well, I think that I don't know, actually. That's kind of how I would bring it up. I wouldn't even say, hey, he's sexually abusing her. But I was like, this priest is texting this young girl. He's twice her age. He's a priest. Why is he texting this young girl? And why is she going everywhere with him? And why is it that every time he shows up to something, she's right there by his side? Like, this doesn't make sense. And I felt like I was talking to a brick wall because every person was like, you just have it out for him. I had this reputation of being the rebellious, the like black sheep. I was the person that had it out for this man that was a great man. And years later, then found out I was right about all the assumptions. He had been sexually abusing her. And then all of my expectations and opinions about the people within the church were confirmed.
Yeah. With
the way it was handled and the way it was brushed under the rug. We don't talk about it. She went on and got married so soon after, and everything's fine because she's having babies now.
And I think what's scarier to me is the fact that he was brought into this church by the leadership. So there should be no trust in this church. This church is whack. Nobody should go there. Get your children out. Yep, run for your life. The fact that he was brought in after having an offense prior, that was credible.
In seminary.
Yes. So he had already had that with a girl of a similar age. Mm-hmm. Comes in and now is around young people. So it's like either the adults are warned about it and they didn't care, or the adults weren't warned about it at all and the leadership of the church failed. Yeah. He had no business being around children. Mm-hmm. Sure, you want to give him another chance. You want to, I wouldn't do that. You want to do that? Warn people.
Mm-hmm.
Give people the heads up that their children are around somebody who's a predator.
No, he was then moved to a different church.
Yeah. And then after that, he gets moved to another church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. He was moved to another church after we found out that he had been sexually abusing this young girl for years. And then eventually defrocked, and I think he's in jail now.
Took too long.
God.
It took way too long.
It took so long, and even after finding out what had happened, there was still division within that church about if he was in the right or the wrong.
Oh my God.
There was still, the conversations that were happening were about if that 12-year-old, 13-year-old girl was tempting him in being in his presence, instead of, is the 30-year-old priest abusing a girl? It was, well, what was she wearing? Was she around him when she shouldn't have been? Did she say something suggestive? There was still division. And even with the people who thought he was in the wrong, it still wasn't even treated like a great offense. It was still treated as like, oh, whoops, that was not good. Let's move on. And everybody did move on. Now then they brought in another young priest who is a great, charismatic, so smart priest
who's
at so
every
good
event.
with kids.
Yeah, who's at every event.
Who loves to spend time around the kids, like the last one did. Who is like him 2.0, and just wait a couple of years and something will come out. I'm sure of it.
There's just the culture of the church and then the church itself that are just so problematic because you're, like you said, making the perfect victims. There is so little supervision of these children as well. And then when abuse does come out, there's no protection of these children. You're not warning parents. Not that these parents are going to do anything because they're so sleepy.
There was no church-wide conversation about it. It was all quiet. Nobody talked about, hey, what do we do the next time this situation comes up? Or how do we support this girl that just went through that? There was, conversations amongst individual families and that people were gossiping. But there was no action taken after it. It was like, well, justice will be served when he goes to purgatory. There's no protection. There is no protection at all.
It's not St. Paul's. It's St. Lucifer's at this point. Like,
honestly,
if you're not protecting children, you're just evil. This is demonic. Genuinely demonic.
It really is. And that was one of the final straws. Like, seeing all that play out at that point, I had already been questioning everything. But that was one of the final straws. Seeing how that was handled, I was like, oh, I cannot stand next to a single one of you adults that stood by and let this happen and then didn't do anything about it and are now repeating the same cycle.
Yeah.
And pretend you're good. Still, I still can't be around
This
them.
is also an extension of why you're surrounded by so many people and women and stuff, but you don't have a village because you're not leaving your kids with these people.
No, absolutely not. No, absolutely not. Even I remember having this conversation with my mom when all this was going on, and I was like, hey, this is extremely serious. This is a very serious matter. This should be talked about. This, like, there needs to be something done. And it was like this, I genuinely felt like I was talking to a brick wall, like constantly screaming out, like, something needs to be done about this. Something needs to happen. And just being met with, like, don't gossip.
Don't
you
gossip
shouldn't
like
talk
that.
about people.
Yeah.
You shouldn't detract. You shouldn't make him look bad, even though he's doing bad things.
Yeah.
It was like, you shouldn't talk about him. Let's not talk about it because we don't want to have cause to sin.
Once again, I don't know who they're following because it's not Jesus Christ of Nazareth. That's
at all
somebody else.
I don't know who.
That is somebody
but
else.
Definitely not.
I feel like this is going to I hope it makes them angry.
Hopefully.
But they ridicule, I feel like, Muslims so much. And obviously Muslim extremism and fundamentalism
you have no idea how much they ridicule Muslims. You have no idea.
I just want to focus on the fact that this church would do so well under the Taliban.
Yeah.
Like, you guys would fit right in, and there would be so much welcoming energy there. I really think that if you want to continue this, America is not your home. This is not American.
This isn't the right
you
place
guys
for
need
you.
to move to Iran or somewhere else
Mm-hmm.
under Islamic fundamentalist extremist terrorist organizations to be ruling you.
Isn't it funny because they would talk about those organizations and categorize all Muslims underneath them as if they were all these absolutely horrible people who are the king of lies and could never be good people, et cetera, et cetera. And they're doing the same thing.
Yeah. As somebody who grew up in that, I don't identify with any of y'all. You guys are crazy. And this is coming from somebody who grew up Muslim.
Yeah.
You are crazy.
Yeah. It's just enraging, honestly.
Who is giving them the title of Catholic either? Because they don't deserve that.
No.
These are not Catholics. Like I have Catholics around me that are like genuine Catholics. Like, of course there's like disagreements on like doctrine and all that we'll get into, but like they would find this appalling. They would be.
That's why I always have to say I'm Catholic, or I was Catholic, but not the normal type of Catholic. It's not normal. It's not good. It's not holy. It's not healthy. It's not what God intended in any way, shape, or form.
So now that you've stepped away and like you've deconstructed a little bit, where are you with your faith? Because I think a lot of people assume you're atheist because you don't identify with this Church of Satan.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody thinks that I'm atheist, that I'm lost. I went off the deep end, you know?
Yeah.
Truth be told, I have never been more connected to God. I have never had a closer relationship to God than I do being removed from that church.
Yeah. I've seen that firsthand.
Yeah.
Even just like in the short, long time we've been friends.
Yeah. It has been so healing to rediscover and actually have a relationship with God without being within the structure of that church. Like, to realize that God is actually good. God isn't this horrible, scary guy in the sky that would approve of all of this. He actually is good. He actually does have good intentions for us. He actually does love us and care for us, and we are made in his image, and we are perfectly made, and he wants us to respect that, and our bodies host him. Like, that has been so healing to realize, like, we are not inherently bad and evil, and he wouldn't approve of all of this wrongdoing just because it's going to make us holier to have gone through it. I've never been closer to God than I am having been removed from the church.
That is incredible to hear, because I feel like a lot of people, rightfully so, kind of aren't able to be at a place yet where they're able to reflect on the faith as a whole, separate from this identity that churches like this give it. But this, everything that they're teaching and everything that they stand on is so far from God and what he taught. Like, I think Jesus would flip a few tables here.
Oh, yeah. Jesus would be about as enraged as I am.
Yeah. And Jesus would have wanted you to be in a healthy marriage with a healthy man that,
I can confidently say Jesus probably would not stand by and tell the guys, yep, keep doing what you're doing.
And Jesus would have wanted your divorce as well.
Yeah.
He hated divorce, but not in this situation. Not in how do you word this?
In situations of sexual misconduct.
Yes.
Yep.
I think he specifically said that.
I
think he was very, very specific.
He was actually
about
very
that.
clear. Yeah, that man, he would stand right by my side for sure. But all this being said, I am happy that I'm out of it. I am happy about where I am, and I'm so grateful to like have whatever awareness that came to me for whatever reason. And I hope and wish that other people that are still in it do have that. I hope they get to the point where they can have that awareness and kind of realize that that's not the only option, and that's not the right and good way.
Do you have any advice for the women specifically that are in this church, or men?
Yeah. I know it's hard to offer advice because I am an outsider, but I would say if you're in this place where this is all you've ever known, so this is what you believe and this is what you do. We say this a lot, but I think this especially applies here. let yourself be curious. If you're so sure what you believe is right, there is no harm in hearing other people or being around other people, because it should never threaten your own beliefs. And if you do feel threatened by other people having different opinions and different beliefs, it means you're not sure, and maybe you should do a little more questioning. Maybe that's your intuition trying to speak to you.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I say let yourself get curious around other people's experience and other people's beliefs. Talk to them. Have honest conversations without trying to defend yourself and your beliefs, and start connecting with the humans around you and see where it goes.
That's pretty solid advice. Pretty tangible, small things.
Yeah, I don't think that, like, I would never tell somebody never go to church again and abandon your entire faith and, just completely create yourself and your identity.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say if you can start to just be open to hearing other people's experience, you don't have to commit to joining their church.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to agree with them. You don't have to take on their beliefs. But if you can just allow yourself to be open to having genuine, honest conversations with people, it's going to get you pretty far. And I think it's going to help reconnect every part of you, mind, body, and spirit.
Amen.
Thanks so much for joining us for this conversation. It was a lot, but we're happy you're here. You can find us on all podcast streaming platforms. If you have any comments, questions, or things you'd love to hear more about, we would love to talk more about it. Let us know. You can always DM us or leave a comment on our YouTube or Spotify. And you can follow us on all social media platforms at Setting the Table Podcast. And we will see you next Friday at 6.